Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome back to another episode of the Connected and Committed podcast. We hope you had a great last 2 weeks. We just came from Hawaii, and so we're happy. Just so you know, one of my best friends got married, and so it was just. I just love weddings. If you ever want to invite us to a wedding, let us know. We'll put a link below. Just kidding, but kind of serious. We just love weddings, and it's just beautiful to see people like commit to each other and make it all the way because they even had some relationship anxiety, which is crazy. So it's cool to see them make it on the other side. So anyway, I'm overall in a great mood.
That's true. I mean, they had an interesting story, and I think it's good that they were able to overcome all the obstacles and make it. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah, because they both had a lot of differences, which relates to what we're talking about
that's true.
today. It does, because today we're actually going to be talking about differentiating between red flags and preferences, because a lot of the times your anxiety will make it feel like these preferences are actually red flags and you hyperfixate on them, and then it makes it a big deal when it really is more of your preference. And we can have preferences, but sometimes I think what we want to differentiate between is, can you move past preferences? Yes, you can, but sometimes we feel like this is the rock we're going to die on, when it's like it's maybe not as deep as, I don't know, your anxiety is making it seem like.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's not fundamentally is not a deal breaker.
Right.
When people make it deal breakers, and um, because they have probably wrong expectations and just an idealized version of a relationship, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and I think that even for us, we found um, a lot of good things came out of our differences.
Yeah.
Sorry, realizing that like even in our personalities, like we have pretty big differences, you and I, and but I think overall it actually benefited the relationship a lot,
Mm.
and I think that that's something that's important to know because you don't want to be with someone who's exactly like you,
Right.
um, because you need to grow, and I think that's relationships make you grow,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because you are with someone different that you're growing, not because you're with someone exactly like you. And honestly, I think if everybody was with someone exactly like them, I don't know if those relationships would be very fruitful
Sure.
and happy.
That's true. I think that's the thing where right now we first want to to define what a red flag is, because some of us were calling things red flags, and I'm like, I don't, that's not really a red flag. So overall, according to Chat
GP.
GPT, I've been saying GBT for a while. I'm gonna be honest with you. Okay. Um, But kind of a definition of a red flag is a pattern that reflects core values that are misaligned or emotional unhealth. So just even summarizing that, just in a sense of our core values are completely different. That is a red flag, you know? And also in the sense of um there's things that I'm like, this is actually really, really unhealthy if this person is fully living a life like this. Like that, or those are red flags. So examples, fine, different faith, like different, like in a sense, I am a Christian, they're an atheist. Those are completely different. That's a red flag to me, because faith is a huge part of our life, you know? Um, addiction is definitely a red flag, especially if it's like really, really, they're not even trying to work on it, or drug addiction, obviously, like that's like, you're in a situation that can put you in harm's way if that person is addicted to drugs, right? Or gambling, if that person isn't responsible with money because they're throwing all their money away, that's like just kind of a state of where their heart is at, rather than it being like, oh well, they're just kind of,
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, like that's kind of like a, they need to get some help type of thing. um I didn't even, oh, I will say this for us too, porn addiction, if this person is like really heavily into porn, for us that's a red flag. Not everybody agrees with me on that, and everybody maybe agrees that porn's a deal breaker, and that's totally fine. But studies have shown that porn is, eh, we're not here to talk about that right now, but porn is really, really, really not good for you.
Yeah.
And if someone's like deeply into that, that really shows a lot about maybe what's going on for them, rather than it being just like, that's something I'm gonna look past. So again, I can be, you can call that a preference if you want, but for me, that's a red
No
flag.
preference.
Some people call that a preference, which is interesting. Um,
Yeah.
so it's a couple of things, like someone who's really, really manipulative and narcissistic, like narcissistic. narcissist. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That those are red flags. So things that are just kind of obvious in your face. We can
Psychopath.
psychopath, like anything that's just
Sociopath.
like, wow, this if anyone else is in this situation, like think about if you had a future child. If your future child was in that type of relationship, would you be okay with that? That is like, in my opinion, a red flag. Um Now if we were talking about preferences, I don't know how you would define that.
I mean, I don't know how to define a preference. I think preference is it's in the word.
Yeah.
It's, what do you like? You know what I mean? What would you want your partner to be like? What would you want them to have, or whatever it is, in terms of like personalities, in terms of the things they like to do,
Yeah.
in terms of maybe the way they dress, whatever, the way they look. Obviously, I think that's obviously a preference. Uh, so even, you want someone who looks like this or like that, like that's definitely a preference, not necessarily a red flag, or a deal breaker for some people. I know that it can be a deal breaker, but again, that's a preference. Like, it's not gonna, when I think when we talk about red flags, it's like things that will lead to an unhappy relationship, unsuccessful relationship, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
When like the other things are preferences, and they're not necessarily something that if you don't have it, the relationship is not going to work.
Yeah.
Unless you are really set on it, then that's totally fine too. But I think for a lot of people who have relationship anxiety, they sometimes think that preferences are deal breakers, and some things like the sense of humor, for example, which is something that comes up a lot.
Comes up a lot,
Yeah,
which is interesting to me.
where they're really worried that like because their partner has a different sense of humor, like that's not going to work. Which is very interesting, because I think I think in general most men and women have different sense of humor.
Yeah.
Like, I show her a lot of reels and stuff,
And
and
vice
she's
versa.
like, and she's like,
I'm like, you don't think this is funny?
and I'm
This is
like, what the
hilarious.
heck? What do you mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so it's interesting. And then obviously in other areas we have a similar sense of
Yeah.
humor. Um, but I feel like for the most part, our sense of humor is pretty different, though.
You
Like,
know,
we
I
laugh at different
we
things.
laugh at different things individually, but I still think you're very funny. And you think I'm funny.
I think you're funny, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think that obviously it's not like, I think that I don't really know where this comes from, and I would love to hear more about from people like why this is such a big deal.
But I
But
think,
like,
yeah, I don't even know if it's a sense of humor problem. I think it's just people who are overthinking,
right, I don't
and
think
then
that's
they
the
nitpick
thing.
on everything.
But sense of humor was never a thing that I would have thought about, which is, I'm different, I guess. But I think it's like if we have different sense of humors, this is a reflection of who this person is, and therefore we can't be together. And I'm like, that's a really big jump, and you can see how
Yeah,
easily anxiety is working in that, of just how something so simple can be rooted in something so deep, and it actually isn't that deep. And this is where the difference of red flags and preferences are. Red flag is actually about character. Like, this person, it's rooted in something about who they are, and that is something I cannot uh, connect with or choose to align myself with. You know what I mean? Like, that's a red flag. When it comes to preferences, this is, and want to really emphasize this, having different preferences is not equal incompatibility. That is not what it means. Just because we have different preferences does not mean therefore we're not going to be able to be together. That's not what that looks like. But
yeah,
anxiety connects the gap and makes it seem like we have different preferences, therefore we cannot be together. And we're trying to help you differentiate between, like, honestly, just cut the line between like where does this fall in, which means red flags, and where does the other lane fall in, which is like everything else. Like, you're able to be with so many different types of people, as long as the core fundamental aspects of who this person is align with you. And so we, on some of us, don't even have that many deep core values. Like, overall, should we, as we mentioned, share faith, just overall alignment, the person's a good person. I feel like for the most part, other um incompatibilities don't matter. Other people did message me, and I want to bring this up to you because it kind of aligns with it. People brought up political parties,
mm,
which for some people that is a red flag, and that's fine. And so for some people that's a preference. I Very close people to me have different political parties and they have a great marriage. Like, very, I know a bunch of people who are married into different political parties, because I think some people see it as if you are blank, therefore your character is flawed. And I think that's where, unfortunately, media makes it seem that way. And I'm not going to go into details of that. I think there are some things that each party might believe that could be a core value for us. And I think that is important to understand. But for some people, if it's so black and white of if you're this, therefore that means that, I don't think that's the case, because a lot of people are more nuanced than just what the one political party means. I don't know if you agree with that.
I think with it's kind of funny because it's not something that really in Europe we talk about much, but in America, I do think that the which like political party you vote for or you're with can definitely reveal a lot of your core values, and so I think that that's something that's important. I don't think it's something that's not important. I think it's important to know what those values are. I think it is possible that two people from who are like maybe like voting for two different parties can be together, but it's going to depend more on like their character and because I think the problem in America is that a lot of people are kind of making their political party like their identity.
Yeah.
um and their core, like they literally like their core values, like it's everything revolves on who's president. Everything revolves on who's in government, and I think that if that's the case for you, I just think that's a very unhealthy place to be, because that's not true. um because, well, especially if you're Christian, like God is above all things, and ultimately I think you can have different convictions. I can see Christians, if we're going into it, like I can see Christians voting Republicans, obviously, because that's usually the obvious thing, but I can also see Christians voting Democrats for other reasons, and we're not going to get into like who you should vote for and all that, because even if you're referring to the people I think you're referring to, um, I think the reason why it can work is because the husband is pretty chill.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like obviously he votes differently than the wife, but his personality is that he's kind of chill. So it's like
That's true.
they're not her is probably, she's more, I think, political. But you won't even know what he votes for.
That's true.
So that's the thing. It's like, okay, well, if they're that way, it's like for us, like sometimes people assume that because I'm European and she's black, we vote a certain way. And so, and we're not like correcting people in their faces, like, oh, actually, no, because we're kind of chill. Like we have our core values, but it does, like, I think personality here is more important than who you vote for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
if
that's true.
I think that if you're two people who are like really, really like heavy into politics, I don't know if it's going to be the best to be with someone who's like from a different party, which is sad. But I think again, it just comes down to your core values more than who you vote for.
Correct.
Because you vote for these people because of your core values, and so if that's why you're doing it, and like it's a deep, deep core value that you live by, then I don't know that it's the best idea to be with someone who has a completely different set of core values. So that can be a deal breaker, I think. And I think another thing that a lot of people don't realize is important, and it's kind of a different topic, but is like finances. Where I do think that finances can be a preference, but it is really important to talk about it.
Sure.
Even for, actually, we didn't really talk about it though before. I don't know.
Didn't.
Yeah.
And I think too, that's where we might jump into this thing of someone put down, I think this was also maybe a preference, but one person's a saver, one person is a spender. Like that's so black and white, because I think when it comes down to it, we all spend money on things that we value. We do. And so even the most frugal person will spend money on something. And even the most person who spends all the money will save money for something. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think in reality, that can be very much a preference because we could make that work. Like I think that if one person, again, if there's extremes on both ends. If one person's like, I don't ever spend money ever, and I like am barely getting by, even though I have all this money because I'm so afraid. Then there's more things going on, and then person who just spends all the money never says anything, and it's like always broke. Then it's like, okay, well, we need to adjust certain things. But again, that's like way more specific and way more, I'll say, extreme cases. It's not
Mm.
always the case. No one is. Most people are not extreme. Most people fall in between. They might lean more one way or the other, but it falls in a nuanced line, you know. And so again, we have to be careful too because anxiety is very black and white. And so we can see one thing. Let's talk about humor, for example. We can see one thing, we see humor, and then we jump into the extreme end of, again, this means something about you rather than it being like this person has different humor than me, but it's not that big of a deal. Like they have really dark, dry humor. My family, we kind of have some, not gonna lie, my siblings and I, we have some dark humor. We do, but it's our sibling thing. It's like some people wouldn't get it, and we wouldn't expose that to everybody. To be quite honest with you, but we have like pretty dark humor. But it's like it very familiar to me, and I love it. But like not everybody, if they did that, like, oh wow, that's like crazy. But we just that's just how we operate. But I think if somebody saw that from me, they'd be like, oh my gosh, does this mean something about her? But it's like I just think it's funny. Like, you know, what I mean, may not make all the jokes, but like we do send our own little memes and reels that are pretty dark. And it's not like a, you know, inappropriate. Well, whatever. It's just family stuff. You know what I mean? It's not a big deal, and I don't see it as like, oh my gosh, because my brother has this dark humor that means something about him. My sister's like this. It's like we're just like funny people, and we don't take things too seriously. You know?
We watch The Office.
Yeah,
So
and we watch. Yeah. So I think that there's like
that's our sense of humor.
that's true. This is our sense of humor. My family and I, we have a different sense of humor, but you think it's funny. I don't know if you've
Yeah.
seen it. Though. Yeah. So, I think that you can see someone have one thing, but it doesn't define who they are, and we have to be careful not to have these preferences define this person. Um,
Especially if it's things where I think it's something actually we that ChatGPT said, and I was like, yeah, that's true. Like the way you put it, I thought was really good. Where he said like it's if it's okay, I don't want to butcher it, so I want to see where it is. Uh, I think what he said here, if it's values, it's serious. If it's vibe, it's usually workable.
mm,
So that means like sense of humor, for example, like it's really about vibe. It's about personality. It's about, you know, what are things that you like, whatever it is. It's not something that as a deal breaker. But I
yeah.
think even sometimes it's not doesn't need to be just a vibe. Like for example, like even when I brought up or here he says like preference is different than incompatibility. You might have to adjust, not abandon. And I think that's really good to say that because
Mm.
even with, let's say, finances, for example. Okay, I want to bring up everything. So finances, that's one of them. Sense of humor, I guess, but not really. I'm talking about the big ones: finances, faith, and here we're not talking about being of a different religion. So we're talking about here about like Christians, for example, but we can be from a different denomination. So if it's finances, faith, what's another big one that you can think of?
I don't know. Do you think health is one?
Health, like working out,
Working out
like
and health
having
is
an
that?
active lifestyle. I think that can be really important. Um, but again, that's not like a red flag. But it can be something that's really important.
Mhm.
So all these things are things that can be changed or like worked on.
Yeah.
All these things are things where like maybe you can meet in the middle somewhere. There could be middle ground. Um, and I think that that's really important to be aware of that because you might approach a relationship or a person and start dating, and then when a difference in those areas comes up, you're like, ah, no, that's not going to work. We
Mm.
can't do anything about that. And obviously, if you decide that no, that's not going to work, then that's you're totally free to do that. But if let's say you're actually with someone who's like a really good person with really good character and really good heart, you know, it might be interesting to kind of work things out
Yeah.
and see if maybe there's room for middle ground. Because if the person is kind of set also like, no, if there's no room, for not compromise. I don't really like that word, but it is kind of what it is in the sense of there has to be room for you to sacrifice some of your views on things, and same for them. With finances, for example, um, where like someone is like you said, a saver, the other one's a spender, or like someone is frugal and the other one likes to travel a lot. Like things like that. Where like, okay, we know couples like that.
And the guy changed.
Yeah, and they kind of like, okay, well, there's a middle ground there
Yeah.
in the sense of, okay, well, I'm open to travel more, and the other one's like, well, I'm open to maybe focus more
Yeah.
on building a household and
Right.
investing in like things like that. And so there's kind of a
Both
middle
address
ground
it.
there.
Yeah.
And that's part of marriage, that's part of relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's so important to understand that, because you can't just be with someone who likes to do everything. Well, you can, but it's not realistic to think that you're going to find someone who likes doing everything the way that you do, because
Yes.
it's not possible. And honestly, I just don't think it's good to do that.
Yeah. I think it's really important for you to be able to see the beauty in the difference. And if you only want everything to be the same, what you're saying is, I want to be comfortable because I don't want to feel any anxiety at all. And you will, sometimes when we see familiarity equals certainty. And that's the problem, that we're trying to find somebody that won't trigger any feelings of uncertainty. Because if you're different, I don't know how to respond to that. I know how to respond when you do the exact same things I do, but if you're different, I don't know how to to navigate that, and that freaks me out, and therefore I don't know what to do with that. That's what that means. And so whenever you're making a preference a red flag, that is what you're saying, and that's what you're doing, rather than being like, I have to be willing to and open to sit in the uncertainty, because life is not always certain. There's going to be so much in life that is not, like, we don't know. We don't know what life's gonna look like. We don't know what life's gonna look like in a year. We don't know how this thing is gonna be showing up in a year. We have no idea. You know what I mean? All we do know is what we know now. And how can I be okay with sitting in the in between, in the uncertainty, and still choosing to love someone? That is what a relationship is, and that's what it means to love.
Yeah.
But you can't only love someone with conditions, because that means it's not
love.
it's not love.
It's conditional.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's good, and I think it's really important to understand, because even like when we say like red flags or preference, I think that I don't like, but that's me personally. Here's maybe a difference. um, there's a difference between a red flag and a deal breaker, because I do think that a lot of times, like I do think that sometimes, or a lot of times, deal breaker for people are not red flags. Like, a red flag should be a deal breaker for everyone.
Yes. Okay.
So emotional unhealth, for example. But then the other thing that even you brought up earlier, what the chat GPT said, which is core values misalignment. Core values misalignment, that's not necessarily a red flag, but it can be a deal breaker. You know what I mean? So you can be with some, like, again, if we're talking about the politics thing, like, you can be voting this way, the other person can be voting this way, which means that you have very different core values.
Maybe.
Yeah, but like for some things you
Sure.
do, and that's not necessarily a red flag. Like that person can be married with someone else, and they're going to be happy. But if it's like a red flag emotional, no matter who they end up with, it's going to be a disaster.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's
Good.
different between red flag and a deal breaker, which every red flag is a deal breaker, I think. But every deal breaker is not necessarily a red flag.
No, that's a really good distinction.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
Because you can be someone who exercises a lot, and being with someone who doesn't care at all about exercise can be a deal breaker for you.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's not necessarily a red flag.
Okay. I think that's helpful to differentiate between, because I think right now, this is also, if you ever do any of our programs, which we will put a plug for RAA in a second, we're always going to tell you, our goal isn't to tell you to stay or leave ever. What we want you to do is be able to push away the anxiety. Once anxiety is gone, I can actually make an informed decision. And so I can actually see if Are these red flags? No. Okay. Is this a deal breaker for me? Yes. Okay, that's fine. You know what I mean? Or no. Great. You know, that's fine. But we need you to be able to come up with a choice on your own. And it's so hard to figure it out when you're full of anxiety. Like right now, all of it's red flags, right? All of it feels so intense and so
High
high
stakes.
stakes because
Yeah.
that's what anxiety does. But if we're able to quiet that anxiety, then I can make a real good decision and be like, you know what? You're great. And also, whatever. Or, you know what? That was just my anxiety. I actually really like you and I really want to continue this. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
that's okay. And these are actually some questions you can start with right now, that might help you kind of reflect a little bit. And then again, we'll make a little plug in for our RA in a second. But so maybe a question that you can kind of put in here when you're thinking about red flag right now, red flag or different or preference. Does this difference create disrespect or harm? Does this difference cause me to feel fundamentally unsafe or unseen? Can we talk about it and find a middle ground? Is this about control or freedom? Which I think that when it comes to anxiety, we really want to control.
Mm-hmm.
And so some that can be a question you can kind of just reflect on. But if you're someone who is like, my anxiety is at a 10 right now, I have such a hard time navigating right now. If it's a red flag, a yellow flag, a green flag, a blue flag, I don't know. RA is a great place to start because we actually have a masterclass on this. But first, what we'll do is we have a few bonus masterclasses plus the first one, which is going to talk about differentiating between anxiety, intuition, God's voice, and then how to lean into your anxiety is another one. We have another bonus masterclass on God's will for your relationship. Like we have just a bunch of bonus masterclasses just from the first month. Then the second month is talking about red, green, yellow flags, preferences. We help you kind of map it out to put into perspective. Okay, this right here is a green flag for me. This right here is a yellow flag for me. This right here is a red flag for me. We all have different, as Matthew was saying, red flags should be red flags for everyone, but not every
Deal
single
breakers.
deal breaker is a red flag. And so when you put it in your own category, you can kind of put it in your perspective of, okay, for me, this is a deal breaker. Okay, that's fine. It might not be a deal breaker for me, but for you, it might be. Like as I was saying, I don't like saying that. I think porn is a red flag, but for example, porn for you might be a yellow flag. That's fine. For me, it's straight up a red flag, and if it's there, it's out. And
I
I
think
know,
it's a
and
red
that's
flag.
I know, but again, not everybody here is a Christian. Everybody here might agree with that. That's
Well, if
fine.
you
But
disagree with that, you should maybe change.
we should maybe listen. We should read send you some book things to
Like,
hear just what porn does. But whatever.
yeah.
Um, but there's some things that the thing is, things that I found out now that I don't think I knew when we were dating, but now I'm realizing like someone who desires to travel is straight up
A deal breaker.
who doesn't desire travel is a deal breaker for me. But I don't think I knew that when we were dating.
But
I'm
I think,
thankful I found
well,
that.
I felt like you knew though that
Well,
like
you're from Europe.
I
I
was
kind of
already
knew.
from Europe,
Yeah,
like all living in the U.S.
yeah,
and
that's true.
I've traveled a lot in my childhood. But yeah, anyways, I think, but again, like that can change too. You know, like
So
that
true.
can change because you are whoever you end up with usually ends up kind of influencing you and the
It's so
way
true.
you see life. So you know, finance is not something we really talked about when we were dating,
Hmm.
and then
It's all we
we
talk
kind
about
of
now.
learned, yeah, we
Just
kind of
kidding.
learned how to make it work our own way,
Yeah.
you know. So it's it's some things you won't be able to figure out until you're married, and that's fine. That's part of life,
Hmm.
and again, that's what we say. There's a difference between a preference, a deal breaker, and a red flag. You
Hmm.
know, it's um, it can be very different.
Yeah.
I think the whole point of this for me personally is to try to tell people that maybe you've had too many deal breakers.
Hmm.
You've set expectations so high that that's why you're still not married or single, and or that's why you're still struggling with relationship anxiety, is because you have unhealthy deal breakers, um, unhealthy expectations, and you've turned a lot of preferences into, yeah, deal breakers, when
Yeah.
like there can actually be things that a preference doesn't mean that you need to stop the relationship because it's different. You know, it's not like we said today. You have a different sense of humor, you have different interests, yeah, that's normal. We're all human beings, we all have our own path, our own life, our own journey,
Yeah.
and we're coming from different places, and that means we're different. And that's kind of the beauty of marriage in general, to be honest, is to be with people who are not like us, but still like learning to love them
Mm.
for who they are, and not. And I think it's really important to learn to love people who are different than us, because that's what love
Yeah.
is to be able to love despite the fact that they're not like us, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. Um, and so we hope that this gave you some clarity, and just even in the sense of maybe my anxiety is causing things to be more black and white than I feel might be necessary. And I think that RA is a great place to start. It's a great place to start. It's $39 a month. And like it's a I think like you joining for the first month, I think you already feel the value because there's a community aspect to it. We have like a private chat group. Obviously, the masterclasses alone to speak for itself.
I mean, we've had a lot of really, really good feedback from the
Yeah,
master
we
classes, so
have.
it's kind of nice to see people go through. Sorry, people go through RA and then tell us that they're done. They're leaving RA because they feel like they've gotten enough,
Yeah.
and they feel like they're in a better place. And so for us, it's great to hear that, because obviously most people, or say a lot of people, come to your Instagram, they want coaching,
Mm.
they want, and that's definitely more hands-on for you,
Yeah.
and for me whenever we do group coaching. um but it's still, and so sometimes the people don't really have the money to invest in that,
Yeah.
because coaching is way more, and we don't have all the, like, we can't help everybody at the same time.
Right.
And so RA is nice because we're not as hands-on, but you still like get to talk to us because we do like Q&As and stuff. But like, just with the masterclasses, it's really nice to hear people actually have breakthrough, um, and get better with their anxiety just because of the masterclasses.
Mm. Yeah, I agree. It's just powerful to hear,
Yeah,
and just to be able to see, and even also in the chat group, people referencing it. Like someone has a question, like, "Oh, make sure you watch the third masterclass," and I'm like, I just think that's really cool. Um, and
yeah,
so it's a really great place to be. It's a great place to start. And I think that you'll get a lot from it. I really do think you will. And so we'll put the link specifically for RA below.
yeah.
Um, and if you have any questions, obviously just like let us know. But we hope this is helpful. If you like this episode, don't forget to. We have it on YouTube too. If you aren't watching, maybe you're watching now. Great, hey. But you can watch our podcast on YouTube if you'd like, if you prefer that. Some people do. I don't know why, but if you do, great. Obviously, we have it on Spotify. We have it on Apple. But don't forget to subscribe. Write a review. Uh,
Like, share,
like, share, do all the things.
just say everything,
All the
because you
things.
always hesitate. I'm like, just say everything.
What do you mean, hesitant?
Like, you, so that when you say like to share and all that, I'm like, just say everything, it doesn't matter.
Oh, I don't know what I always forget, so I'm saying it
Oh,
slowly.
okay.
I'm trying to remember what all things are.
Because I feel like sometimes you try to think like by platform. What
No,
can you do on this one?
I'm
This
just
one
I'm
you
just trying to
review.
remember what all things are. But yeah,
Comment.
comment all the things. And we will plan on seeing y'all in 2 weeks. You have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye.